In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the Zbrush to Keyshot bridge. If you've already watched the video on rendering in Zbrush, you've seen how to use Zbrush's internal renderer, how we can customize materials and also use HDR images. Now, Pixelogic introduced the Zbrush to Keyshot bridge, which is a separate plugin which allows Zbrush to seamlessly integrate with a third-party rendering program called Keyshot. So to follow along with this tutorial, you need to have both the Keyshot bridge and Keyshot. If you don't have Keyshot, I highly recommend getting a copy of it because it is the easiest renderer that gives the best results that I've encountered. It's so simple, as we're about to see. So here I've got the Hellhound model open. Now you'll notice that it's 11 million polygons and we have 3 subtools. There is the body, the teeth, and the tongue. And each one of these has poly paint applied to it. There's no UVs on this particular model. This is all just vertex color. Now, if I want to render using Keyshot, I go to the render menu here and then open up the external render menu and make sure Keyshot is turned on. You can set your max faces here. You can group by materials. You can also send your document background and you can auto merge. I usually leave the settings at their default and just turn on Keyshot. Now, when I'm ready to render, I simply click BPR, and what this does is it executes the Zbrush to Keyshot bridge. You'll see up here, it'll say Zbrush to Keyshot bridge. It will export your model and then import it into Keyshot, and it will carry over all the polygons. It'll handle quite a few, and it will handle the poly painting. It will also take over ZBrush materials, and it will also bring over fiber mesh. So let's go ahead and click BPR. Here you see it says Zbrush to Keyshot bridge. And if we switch over to Keyshot, and here you can see our model loaded into Keyshot. Now, a quick tour of the Keyshot interface. On the left-hand side, you will find the libraries. That's the libraries of all the different types of things you can use in Keyshot: materials, colors, textures, environments, backgrounds. On the right-hand side, we have our scene browser. We have our material settings editor, our environment editor, lighting, camera, and our final image. Now, if you don't see these menus, simply go to the top of the screen and go to Window, go to Library, and open up any of these, and your left-hand menu will come up. Go to Project, click on any of these, and the right-hand menu will come up. Now, the first thing that I want to do is take a look at the scene browser. You see that we've got models, and then we have a group called ZBrush. This is our ZBrush group that's been transferred over. If I open this, you can see there are my 3 subtools. If I select the top node, let's say, for example, my scale in ZBrush was a bit larger than I expected it. Maybe I want to make an adjustment to that. I'll just click Position, go to Move Tool, and on the Move Tool, I'll turn on Scale. And this brings up just this normal gizmo that you're probably accustomed to seeing. And here I can globally scale these objects down, and they'll scale together. So just for the sake of demonstration, I'm just going to scale the object down. There have been times I found that the object scale wasn't conducive to the best results with the lighting or the material settings. So it's nice to know that you can do this particular thing. Now I'm going to click Snap to Ground, and that will snap the object to the ground plane in Keyshot. Now let's go back to ZBrush. I want to illustrate that there is a live link between ZBrush and Keyshot. If I were to take my move brush and just make a change to the model here, let's just pull a big spike off the shoulder, and then we will do our BPR render again. If we return to Keyshot, this is the live link being enacted. What happens is anything that I change in my ZBrush model, if I send it back over to the Keyshot bridge, it will update what's inside that ZBrush model group. So let's give it a moment to bring those objects in. There we go. And let's go ahead and zoom in here. And 2 things. It has updated the model itself, but it's maintained the scale change that I put inside of Keyshot. So that's a nice thing to know that you can do. You can adjust your object scale, but you can also continuously update poly paint, textures, anything in ZBrush that you want to change. You can do that and then live link it back to Keyshot, and that will update. So let's go ahead and undo that model change, and we'll send it back over again. Now you'll see that my camera settings do change each time I come back from the Keyshot bridge. That's not a problem. We can set up cameras and lock them once we're happy with our camera position, and we'll look at that in a moment. I'm just going to frame the model up here. Just get a nice view. about like this. Okay, now the first thing that I want to do is I want to adjust my materials. I start with materials because if we start with lighting and then change the material, it will often drastically change the effect of the lighting. So it's nice to get a material looking okay, then decide on our lighting, and then fine-tune the material to fit the lighting. So let's go ahead and take a look at our environments. If I click the environment library here, this gives me all the different HDR images. We've got outdoor, studio, sun and sky. By default, we have this nice sort of white studio setup. If I go to my environment settings here, you can see the HDR image. It's just the interior of a studio with 2 lights. If I click and drag this rotation bar here, I can rotate the lighting environment. You'll see the lights update on the model based on the position of the hotspots here in the image. Perhaps I want to increase the brightness. If I turn the brightness up, that's going to give me more light falling on the character. If I adjust the contrast, it will adjust the contrast of the lighting. It'll become sharper and more defined. So let's go ahead and adjust our material. I'm going to go to my material settings. And here we see we've got a variety of different materials available. There's cloth and leather, gemstones, various plastics. I even have a custom set of materials here that I used on the cover image for the video series. I customized some particular metals that I wanted to use, and I saved those so I always have access to them. We want a translucent material because we want this to look like skin. So I open translucent. And here we have a variety of different skin shaders, translucent shaders from skin to candle wax. I'm going to select the slightly warmer human skin here. I'm going to click and drag to drop this on the model, and you notice that it wants to replace the poly paint. However, if I press and hold Alt, it will retain my poly paint and apply that material. So let's tweak our material settings now. I'll go to the material menu, and I'll just right click and select Edit Material on the model, and then that brings up our material settings. So we have the surface and the subsurface, and if you mouse over, you will get a tooltip for what each of these things does. So by default, the skin tone on this, it's not quite what I want for my poly painting. Now ideally, this color is not going to change value. You can change its hue and its saturation, but you might want to leave its value about where it is. So what I'll do is I'll turn down the saturation. We want to keep it in relation to the subsurface color as much as possible. We can do some tweaking in the value, but you can throw off the mechanics of the subsurface shader if you do a little bit too much, if you make this one darker or lighter, etc. So usually I just stick around with tweaking my saturation and adjusting the warmth by going to hue and switching and sliding it slightly over to red. I'm going to break my promise and just tweak that value a little bit and tweak that saturation and click OK. Now we have our translucency setting. I'm going to set this translucency setting all the way up to 5 to show you what happens. You see it becomes extremely translucent. If I set this to 0.005, you see it becomes less translucent. I can turn up my refractive index, and that adjusts how much light refracts through the surface. If I turn my roughness down, that will make the surface shinier. If I turn it up, it makes it rougher. So you'll still have that specular component, but it looks like it's on a rougher surface rather than a perfectly polished, smooth plastic surface. So that's your roughness slider there. So I just want to dial in kind of a general look for the shader at this point. So again, I'm going to go back to surface, and I'm just going to dial that back. Go to my hue, like so. Now I'm going to go to textures. Here I've got the texture, which is my poly paint, but it's saved out as a texture to use in Keyshot. Down here I can adjust my brightness. If I turn the brightness slider up, it will increase the brightness of my texture, like so. You can also change your contrast. So sometimes you might find it very useful to do that to bring the surface details out. So let's go ahead and change our lighting environment. I'm going to go to environment, and I'll use one of the outdoor environments here. I quite like this, this village one, so I'll just click and drag, drop it here, and then that updates my lighting environment. go to the environment browser here, or go to the environment adjustment tab, I mean to say, and I can adjust by rotating this, and you see how the shadows and the highlights move across the surface. So now that I've changed my environment, I get a better look at how this creature skin reacts under this lighting. And I can go back to my materials, go back to properties, and perhaps do a little bit of tweaking of this. Maybe we'll turn down the saturation on the subsurface so it's not quite so red. Let's go back to our textures. Look at our brightness. Let's set this back to 1. So oftentimes I'll set it back to its default setting and then bring it back up. So I've just got a clear idea of how it's all looking. It's helpful, I think, just to sort of A/B back and forth with that sort of thing. Let's turn our translucency back up. So we'll go up pretty high and then start dialing that back. I'm just going to keep pulling this back. Let's set it to 0.9. There we go. And let's take our refractive index and turn that up a little bit. And there we go. We're starting to get a real nice look to the surface. Maybe we'll make it a little bit rougher. I kind of like the idea of this creature looking a little bit wet. But suffice to say, if you bring roughness down, of course, you're going to have a stronger, more contiguous specular component than if you turn the roughness up. So here we've got our creature under this nice lighting environment. If I go to the environment settings here, I can change my background. Maybe I don't want to see this creature sitting in this park, but I do like the look of the lighting. So I go to color, and then I can change this to a nice neutral gray. And then that gives me this neutral gray background. I can turn on ground shadows here, and I can change my ground size. You turn the ground size up, turn the ground size down. There you go. You see that you can impact the effect of the shadowing here. So there we go. So don't neglect your ground shadows because they're quite helpful. Go to lighting, and we can adjust our shadow quality. So I'll turn the shadow quality up, and you see that increases the quality of the shadows. You can also turn on ground illumination, so you're getting some bounce light off the ground. You can turn on global illumination, which will increase your render time. Speaking of, notice that as I'm making changes, Keyshot is updating in real time. It is rendering in this window, giving me a preview of my look. So I'm going to go ahead and tweak that translucency a little bit more. And my roughness. There we go. Okay. So let's say I want to change my lighting environment. Oops, I'm going to make that a little less rough and a little less refractive. There we go. Let's say I want to change my lighting environment. I really like to use the studio environments. I do think these location environments are really nice, but if I'm just trying to show my creature, I like to go here to 3-point or basic or light tent. If we go to enclosed, these are various types of lighting setups that you would find in a photo studio. So let's go to 3-point. We have a 3-point dark. Now if I click and drag, drop this in the viewport, it will update my lighting environment. So give that a moment. And here we go. Now you see as the lighting changes, the look of the creature will change drastically, the look of the materials. That's what I was saying. I like to dial in the material first, then tweak the lighting. So let's go to our environment tab again. And here we have our preview of the HDR. And these are nice because you can actually select and move these lights, which if you're accustomed to lighting in a 3D program or even lighting in the real world in photography, it's really nice to be able to select and move these lights around. So as before, we can rotate our lighting environment globally like this. And this is giving me this real nice rim light right there. I quite like that. So let's go to our HDR editor. And what I like to do is turn off all the lights. And then I turn off one at a time. So I like that rim light. So let me find that one. That's the rim light right there. I think that's beautiful. I will select this light. And perhaps I want to change the color. I'll click the color swatch. And maybe we want to give a little bit of green to this rim light. So I'll just update this. And you can see it updates in the renderer. If I make it super saturated, I'll get a really saturated green there, but I don't necessarily want that. I just want a little green in that rim light. Click OK. And now I'll turn on my second overhead light and select this. Now perhaps I want to increase the brightness of this. So it's set to 3 right now. So let's, like I said, I like to overshoot. So we'll set it to 6. And actually that's not too bad. I can change its position. Maybe I want to bring it up a little bit. That's a nice effect. Maybe I want to bring it over here. And you can see the lighting change on the character. If I move the light over here, it starts to come more to the front. Bring it up like this. And then I'll change the color here. Let's actually bring it over to a warmer hue. Turn my saturation up, and it gives me a nice warm light. Ooh, that's a little too warm. Let's go ahead and dial back that saturation. Click OK. Now I'll turn on my overhead gradient. Now I'll turn off these other 2 lights just to see exactly what the contribution is of the overhead gradient. Select this, and let's take our stop brightness. And again, I like to overshoot. I'll set it from 1 to 3, from 3 to 6. I just want to see what I'm actually getting from this. I want to see what happens if I move this. If you bring it up, it becomes, you see how this is an unwrapped sphere. So as I move this up, it starts to expand across the entire top of that sphere. If we go back to this and let's really shoot it up to like 12. There we go. That's kind of nice, but it's probably going to be overpowering once we turn on our other lights. So this is mainly just sort of a fill. So let's dial that back and turn on our other 2 lights. And then we can move this around and see what kind of effect we get. And let's dial this back. Let's put this back down to 1. There we go. So that gives us back a little bit more of that chiaroscuro, a little shadow under there. It doesn't quite blot everything out so much. Now I can change the color on this as well. I can change my various settings on here, but I'm pretty happy with what this is. I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to go back to my rim light. And I want to illustrate something for you here. If I go to my rim light, and it's 2.8 and 30 for radius. So if I take my radius and increase that, you see that changes the fall off of the light. It's no longer a rim light, it's changed the radius of the light, so it's hitting more of the character. If I turn this down, I can narrow that band and really get a sharp rim light here. When I do that, I might elect to increase my brightness. And there we go. I really think it's important to get a rim light on your character. It helps carve it out from the background a little bit. Let's say maybe you want a little rim light over here of a different hue. I can right-click and duplicate this light. So now I've got a copy of this light I can select, and I can move this down here. And let's change the color on this rim light. Let's make this one, if we're doing green, let's do a little purple. Green and purple is a nice color contrast. That's quite nice. Let's turn off our rim light there, and let's move this. See, I just moved it under the floor plane there. If that happens, you've just moved it under the floor plane, so you just need to bring it up. There we go. I want to get a nice purple rim. We'll turn down the radius, so it's quite a sharp light there. And let's turn up our brightness. Let's overshoot this. I'll turn it all the way up to 12. Let's turn it down to 7. Turn our radius down. And just gently scooch this over a little bit. I just want that little bit of light to carve him away from the background. And now we'll turn our other lights back on. And now you can see the contribution of all of those. It's a subtle difference, but it makes a big difference, I think. So we turn that back on. You can see the effect of that. I spend a lot of time tweaking lighting because you can spend so much time painting and sculpting, but if you put bad lighting on your character, all that work is lost. So here we have our light setup, our material setup. Again, we can go back to our materials and we can change our translucency settings if we decide to. Let's turn this up. let's really overshoot that. I'll turn it up to 12, and you can see the impact of that. If I take my refractive index and turn it up from 1.3, you can see the effect of that. I'm going to bring that back down. Actually, let's go crazy. Let's turn it all the way up. You see the effect of that. It starts to become metallic. So let's set it to 1. Bring our translucency back. Find a nice setting for that. There, no, that's a little bit too opaque. I'll just bring that back up to 1. There we go, that's nice. All right, so let's say we want to do a render. I'm going to go to my camera, and remember I said that you can create and lock a camera. So I'm going to create a new camera here. So this will be camera 1. We'll just call this 3/4. I can change my perspective. It's set to 50 mil. If I dial this up, I can get a more telephoto look. If I bring it back, it becomes more fisheye. So if we zoom into the character a bit, we get a little bit more perspective distortion here that can be quite dramatic. Let's really take advantage of the full zoom in. Come on. There we go. I'm going to go to pan and move this. I'll set camera target and I'll click on the model. Let's zoom this out, and that just sets the model as my target. There we go. So if you have trouble moving your camera around, sometimes it's helpful just to snap it to the target of what you want to look at. All right, great. So let's go back to our scene. Now you'll notice my teeth and tongue have disappeared for some reason. If that happens to you, just come back here and adjust your visibility on those items, and it will bring them back. Now, if I wanted to put a different material on something, maybe I want to put a different material in the teeth, I'll go to my material settings here. I quite like using a translucent material on teeth because teeth and living bone does have some translucency to it, but especially teeth with enamel. So what I can do is I can isolate just the teeth if I like. And let's say, let's just grab this one here. Hold down the Alt key so we're maintaining our poly paint. Let's go to our camera. Now, I like my 3/4 camera, so I am going to save it. And this is kind of an annoying thing in Keyshot. If you don't save your camera, it will move and you'll lose your camera position. So I save my camera, right click, and then lock that particular camera. Then I'll go to the free camera, and the free camera is the one I use to zoom around and sort of check the model. So let's zoom into this and right click and go to edit material. Let's take my surface, and I'm breaking my promise to you and actually changing. So I'm just going to adjust these settings here. Take our translucency, turn that up a bit, go to our textures, turn our brightness up a bit, and go back to our properties, and let's make them a little bit rougher. Not that rough because they are teeth. So there we go. So we've got a different material now. So I'll go back to my camera. I will select my 3/4 camera, go to my scene, and I will bring back visibility of the other two objects here. So there we go. So now we're ready to do a render. I will go to Render, open up the Render menu, and here's where you set your file name. You can set the location where you want to save the render. I typically use a PSD. Set your resolution, and then turn on render passes. Now, render passes allow you to break things out in render passes, just like we did in Zbrush when we did our Zbrush to Photoshop lesson. You can have a diffuse pass, a lighting pass, global illusion, caustics if you have that in your scene. Reflection is very good to turn on because that'll give you a specular pass. Shadow, of course, ambient occlusion. Clown pass gives you a flat color for each separate object, which is very good for masking. Depth, we'll write out a separate EXR file of a depth map, and normals can be useful. Then check Add to PSD. That will add all of these as layers to a PSD file with your final render as the bottom layer. Now I can add this to a render queue by clicking Add to Queue, or I can just execute the render now. If I do choose to use the render queue, you can add multiple views and render them all. So let's say, for example, I want to add this to queue. So I'll go to Render, Add to Queue. And how many times do you render out multiple views? All the time. So I'll go to Camera, go back to my free camera. I'll create a new one. We'll call this Close-Up. I'll zoom this camera in. And let's say we want this camera to just look at the face. Let's turn up our focal length. There we go. I'll save that camera and then go to Render, Add to Queue. So now I have two in the render queue. Now it saves out a different scene file for this. You can change your materials and also add that to queue and do another material render. So if I go to Plastic, go to Hard, Rough, we'll do a hard, rough plastic. And let's say we don't want our poly paint on this one. I'll just change my material, go to my material settings, right click, edit material. And I will change my diffuse. Let's turn the value on this down. There we go. And I will add to queue. Now if I go back to render, go to render, open up the render menu, and here you see I've got my different images queued up to render with different materials. If I click Process Queue, it will render all of those and save them out at the resolution and the settings that we've set here. Now this is quite nice. You can also do turntables and other animations inside of Keyshot. So I'm going to go back to my camera. I'm going to lock close-up camera. I'm going to create a new camera, and we'll call this animation. Let's zoom out. Now I will go to Window, Animation, and that's going to open up my animation bar down here. Setting up an animation in Keyshot is shockingly simple. Click Animation Wizard, choose which type of animation. Let's do a turntable. It gives me a clear look at the direction of rotation. I can add orbit to the camera animation. I can do a zoom. I can do inclination, so the camera is moving up. I can do translation, panorama. You can play with all of these. So let's go back to turntable. Click Next. I'm going to select the group. Next. Now I can set the degrees. Obviously I want 360 degrees. I can make the model the center of rotation or the environment, and I can change my direction. You can also do motion ease, so you can change the keyframes. You can ease in and ease out. You can do ease in separately or ease out separately, or do both, which is actually quite a nice little effect. Just spices up the animation a little bit if you're so inclined. We definitely don't want, there we go, let's do that. We want to ease in, ease out. There we are. And we can set our duration. Click Finish, and it sets up your keyframes for you. Everything is set. So if I click play, you see it's going to give me that rotation. So I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go back to the camera. I'm actually going to position my camera again and save it this time. Remember what I said, it's very annoying if you don't save your camera. So let's save this camera, lock it, scrub the timeline, and there you go. So if we press play, we'll have our rotation. Now if we want to render, we go to Render, open the render menu, go to Animation, and this will render the animation that's on that timeline. So we can do a video output, we can output individual frames, and we can also do layers and passes, which is very handy if you're going to be compositing this in Nuke or maybe After Effects or Premiere. So all in all, Keyshot is a remarkable renderer, and being able to have it linked live to ZBrush like this is game changing for me because I was always very, very frustrated spending a lot of time and effort tweaking settings, tweaking, you know, render values when I just wanted to get a nice image out that I could work with. So being able to have a consistently good, solid renderer with easy settings right at your fingertips is incredible. So I hope this video has helped explain the ZBrush to Keyshot bridge for you, and you feel confident that you can go in and start creating your own looks and your own renders now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.